Deep beneath the opulent floors of the royal keep, iron scraped against stone. A king, accustomed to the scent of victory and submission, suddenly stopped. Through the damp, decaying air of the dungeons, a scent hit him, vanilla and bruised pine. His fated mate was down here, caged like an animal. The great hall of Ethelgard was ablaze with the warmth of 1,000 hearth fires, a stark contrast to the bitter winter winds howling beyond the castle walls. King Cedric Alden had just returned from a brutal 3-month campaign at the northern borders. His armor was scarred, his cape was heavy with frost, and his inner wolf was restless, pacing within his mind with a predatory agitation that even victory could not quell. For 5 years, Cedric had ruled the most powerful Lycan kingdom in the known world. He was a ruthless tactician and a fair ruler, yet his counsel whispered behind closed doors. An alpha king without a Luna was a king walking a fragile line between humanity and primal madness. His mother, Dowager Queen Matilda, had paraded endless successions of high-born ladies and foreign princesses before him. His wolf had rejected them all. On this night, before he would allow himself the comfort of a hot bath or a warm meal, Cedric had one final duty. A traitor from the rebellion had been captured and held in the subterranean levels of Worm Keep, the deepest, darkest pits of the castle dungeons, reserved only for the kingdom's most dangerous enemies. Accompanied only by his shadow guard, Cedric descended the spiraling stone steps. With every level they dropped, the air grew colder, thicker, and heavier with the stench of despair. Torches flickered weakly against the encroaching dark, casting long, distorted shadows on the weeping stone walls. Then it happened. Cedric froze on the 4th subterranean landing. His massive frame went entirely rigid. His pupils dilated, swallowing the golden irises, turning his eyes to voids of pure, unadulterated instinct. The Shadow Guard halted instantly, sensing the immediate shift in their alpha's aura. The sheer pressure rolling off Cedric was enough to make the seasoned warriors drop to one knee in submission. It was faint at first, masked by the metallic tang of rust and the foul odor of mildew. But to the heightened senses of the Alpha King, it cut through the darkness like a beacon of blinding light. Vanilla, bruised pine needles, the crisp scent of a coming snowstorm. His wolf lunged to the forefront of his mind, letting out a deafening, possessive roar that echoed solely within Cedric's skull. Cedric did not walk. He moved with a terrifying, silent speed, tearing down the remaining flights of stairs. He bypassed the cell of the captured rebel entirely, his boots hammering against the cobblestones as he followed the invisible thread of that intoxicating scent. He navigated the labyrinthine corridors of the abyss, descending into a restricted sector of the dungeon that even he rarely visited, the oubliettes. At the end of a narrow, lightless hallway, a solitary iron door stood barred and padlocked. The scent was suffocatingly strong here, laced with something that made Cedric's blood run cold. Fear, pain, starvation. Sir Gawain, the aging dungeon warden who had scrambled to keep up with the king's sudden sprint, arrived breathless and trembling. "My king, you must not go down here. These cells are—" Cedric didn't wait for him to finish. He grabbed the heavy iron padlock with his bare hands. Channeling the monstrous strength of his Lycan heritage, he twisted. The metal shrieked in protest before snapping in two. He kicked the heavy door, sending it crashing inward against the stone wall with a booming echo. Inside, the cell was pitch black, freezing, and damp. Cedric snatched a torch from the wall outside and stepped over the threshold. In the corner of the cell, chained to the wall by heavy iron cuffs around her wrists and ankles, was a woman. She was huddled into a tiny ball, shivering violently against the freezing stone. Her clothes were nothing but filthy rags, hanging off a frame that had grown terrifyingly thin. Her long, tangled hair fell over her face, masking her features. But as the torchlight hit her, she flinched, curling tighter into herself. Cedric's heart stopped. The world around him ceased to exist. He dropped the torch. It clattered to the floor, illuminating the space just enough for him to see. He fell to his knees in the filth and muck, entirely uncaring of his royal status. "Look at me," Cedric whispered, his voice cracking, thick with a desperate, guttural emotion that shocked his guards. The woman slowly raised her head. Despite the dirt smudging her cheeks and the hollow exhaustion in her eyes, she possessed an undeniable, breathtaking beauty. Her eyes were a piercing, defiant shade of emerald green. As their eyes locked, the undeniable snap of the mate bond slammed into them both. It was a physical force, a tether woven of soul and magic that cemented them together in an instant. Her eyes widened, the breath catching in her throat as she felt the primal resonance of the king's soul crying out to hers. This was Beatrice Montgomery. "Mate," Cedric breathed out, reaching a trembling hand forward to brush the matted hair from her icy cheek. Beatrice flinched at the movement, a protective reflex born of weeks in captivity. The sight of his mate cowering from him sent a violent surge of protective rage through Cedric's veins. He grabbed the chains binding her wrists. The iron was thick, designed to hold rogue werewolves, but Cedric's fury defied limits. He pulled with a terrifying roar, the muscles in his back and arms tearing through the seams of his tunic. The bolts ripped straight out of the masonry, sending a shower of stone dust over them. He shattered the cuffs around her ankles with a heavy strike from the hilt of his sword. Beatrice slumped forward, exhausted, and Cedric caught her, pulling her small, freezing body against his burning, hot chest. He wrapped his heavy, fur-lined winter cloak around her, cocooning her completely. She buried her face into his neck, unconsciously inhaling his scent of sandalwood and leather, whimpering softly as the warmth finally seeped into her frozen bones. Cedric stood, cradling his mate in his arms. When he turned back toward the cell door, his eyes were glowing a brilliant, lethal gold. His fangs had descended, and his claws extended from his fingertips. The Alpha King was gone. Only the beast remained. Sir Gawain was on his knees, pressing his forehead to the stone floor, weeping in absolute terror. "Who?" Cedric's voice was not human. It was a low, vibrating growl that shook the very foundations of the dungeon. "Who did this? My king, I beg for mercy," Gawain sobbed. "I did not know. She was brought in the dead of night, nearly 2 moons ago. I was ordered to keep her hidden, to starve her into submission, to never speak her name." "Who gave the order?" Cedric roared, the sound echoing up the shafts of the prison, causing prisoners and guards alike to cover their ears. Gawain looked up, his face pale as a corpse. "The decree. It bore the royal seal, my king. The order came directly from the Dowager Queen's chambers, and it was signed by the hand of the council. Lord Reginald. The ascent from the dungeons was a blur of righteous, earth-shattering fury. Cedric marched through the stone corridors of Worm Keep, with Beatrice pressed tightly against his heart. She was terrifyingly light. The pack link, the telepathic network connecting every werewolf in the kingdom to their alpha, was practically exploding with Cedric's unrestrained rage. Wolves miles away in the surrounding villages woke from their sleep, whimpering as the psychic shockwave of their king's wrath crashed over them. As Cedric kicked open the heavy oak doors leading from the dungeons into the main keep, courtiers and servants froze. Gasps echoed through the opulent halls. There was their feared and revered Alpha King, covered in dirt and dungeon filth, carrying a woman swathed in his royal cloak. "Summon the royal physician to my private chambers immediately!" Cedric barked at the captain of the guard, his voice laced with the compelling power of the Alpha Command. "And lock down the castle. No one enters. No one leaves. And any man who tries to breach the gates is to be executed on sight." He carried Beatrice up the grand staircase to the highest tower, sweeping past the heavily armed guards into his private sanctuary. The room was heated by a massive fireplace, glowing with warm embers. He laid her gently onto the center of his massive silk-draped bed, as if she were made of spun glass. Beatrice groaned softly as the soft mattress enveloped her. Her emerald eyes fluttered open, struggling to focus on the giant of a man hovering over her. "You're safe," Cedric whispered, his thumb gently stroking her dirt-smudged cheek. His inner wolf was whining, pacing frantically at the sight of her bruised wrists. "I swear to you on my life and my crown, you will never see the dark again." Dr. Aris, an elderly werewolf with a gentle demeanor, rushed into the room, panting heavily. Cedric stepped back, though his wolf screamed in protest at creating even an inch of distance between them. "Examine her," Cedric ordered, his jaw ticking. "Heal her. Give her whatever she needs. If she worsens, Dr. Aris, I will hold you personally responsible." Leaving his mate under the care of the physician and a dozen of his most elite, hand-picked royal guards, Cedric turned toward the heavy mahogany doors of his chamber. The tender, worried mate vanished. The ruthless, bloodthirsty king of Ethelgard returned. He strode toward the great hall. By now, the emergency summons had dragged the royal council from their beds. The grand room, usually a place of feasting and diplomacy, felt like an executioner's block. At the head of the long council table stood Dowager Queen Matilda. She was a striking woman. Her silver, woven intricately, with pearls, her posture straight and unyielding. Beside her was Lord Reginald, the king's most trusted advisor, a man who had mentored Cedric since the death of the former king. As Cedric entered, the heavy doors slamming shut behind him, a suffocating silence fell over the room. The air grew thick, heavy with the oppressive weight of the Alpha's dominance. Lord Reginald paled, shifting uncomfortably, but Queen Matilda kept her chin high, her expression composed. Cedric didn't take his throne. He walked slowly around the massive oak table, his heavy boots echoing like a death knell. 2 months, Cedric began, his voice dangerously soft, devoid of its usual booming resonance. For 2 months, I have been riding through the freezing rain, bleeding for this kingdom, fighting rogues and securing our borders. And while I was spilling my blood to protect Ethelgard, he stopped directly behind Lord Reginald's chair. My council was busy locking innocent women in the oubliettes. Lord Reginald cleared his throat nervously. My king, you must understand. The kingdom's internal security. Cedric's hand shot out. He grabbed Lord Reginald by the back of his velvet collar and hauled him out of his chair, throwing the grown man across the room with effortless, brutal strength. Reginald crashed into a stone pillar, gasping for breath as he collapsed to the floor. The rest of the council jumped from their seats, terrified. "Do not speak to me of security!" Cedric roared, slamming his fists onto the oak table, cracking the thick wood down the center. "You threw my fated mate into a freezing cell to rot!" Gasps rippled through the room. The councillors exchanged panicked glances. A fated mate was a sacred gift from the moon goddess. To harm an alpha's mate was an act of high treason, punishable by slow, agonizing death. "She is a Montgomery!" Dowager Queen Matilda finally spoke, her voice ringing out sharply, refusing to back down. She stepped forward, her eyes flashing with a mother's desperate authority. "She is Beatrice Montgomery, Cedric, daughter of Duke Arthur Montgomery, the very man who tried to bankrupt this kingdom and fund the Southern Rebellion." Cedric turned to his mother, his eyes narrowing. "Duke Montgomery was exiled for treason 3 years ago. His lands were stripped, his family disgraced. But his daughter was completely innocent. We spared her. She was sent to a convent in the East. How did she end up chained to a wall in my dungeon?" "Because she is a threat to your reign," Matilda shouted back. "The moon goddess made a mistake. You are the Alpha King. You are meant to wed Princess Leonora of the Western Pax, to forge an alliance that will make Ethelgard invincible. You cannot mate with the disgraced daughter of a traitor. The nobles would revolt. The kingdom would fracture." Cedric stared at the woman who had raised him. The betrayal cut deeper than any blade he had ever taken in battle. "So you knew," Cedric said, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "You found out she was my mate." Matilda swallowed hard, her composure faltering for a fraction of a second. "My spies in the reported that her scent was changing, maturing into the scent destined for your bloodline. It was a well-known prophecy. I intercepted her before she could cross your path. I had Reginald bring her here, in secret. It was for the good of the realm, Cedric. A king must make sacrifices for his people." "You locked my soul in a cage," Cedric said, his eyes glowing gold again. "You starved the other half of my spirit. You tortured my Luna." "She is no Luna," Reginald spat from the floor, clutching his bruised ribs. "She is peasant trash now. Marry her, and this council will not support you, Cedric." Cedric didn't yell this time. He slowly drew the broadsword from his hip. The unmistakable hiss of steel against a leather scabbard made the blood drain from Reginald's face. "Lord Reginald," Cedric said, stepping over to the cowering advisor. "You forget yourself. You forget who rules this pack. I do not need the council's support. I am the king by divine right and by the blood in my veins." Cedric raised the sword, "And any man who lays a hand on my queen forfeits his life." With a swift, merciless arc, Cedric brought the heavy pommel of the sword down, not to execute him, but to shatter Reginald's shoulder. Reginald screamed in agony, collapsing back to the floor. "Throw him in the oubliette," Cedric commanded his guards, who immediately stepped forward to drag the sobbing advisor away. "Let him see how he enjoys the hospitality he showed my mate." Cedric turned his piercing gaze back to his mother. Dowager Queen Matilda stood rigid, her face pale. finally realizing the absolute catastrophe she had brought upon herself. "As for you, mother," Cedric's voice was as cold as the northern winds, "you will be escorted to your chambers. You are stripped of your title on the council. You will remain under house arrest until I decide what to do with you." "Cedric, you cannot—" "I can, and I have," he thundered, silencing her completely. He sheathed his sword, his chest heaving as he looked around the trembling council members. "Beatrice Montgomery is the Lunar Queen of Ethelgard. When she is healed, we will be bound under the full moon. Anyone who objects will join Lord Reginald in the dark." Cedric turned on his heel, his heavy cape billowing behind him, and left the stunned silence of the great hall to return to the only thing that mattered: the broken woman sleeping in his bed, unaware of the storm her king had just unleashed upon the world to avenge her. For 3 days and 3 nights, King Cedric did not leave his royal chambers. The affairs of the kingdom were delegated to his military generals, and the heavy oak doors remained guarded by his most lethal sentinels. Inside, the massive stone fireplace was kept roaring, casting a warm, flickering glow over the room where Beatrice Montgomery fought her way back to the living. Dr. Aris had diagnosed her with severe malnutrition, wolfsbane poisoning, administered in small doses to suppress her wolf and keep her weak, and profound physical trauma. Yet, despite the fragility of her frame, Beatrice's spirit was an ember refusing to be extinguished. On the evening of the 4th day, as a fierce snowstorm battered the tall glass windows of Worm Keep, Beatrice finally opened her eyes. The first thing she registered was the overwhelming, intoxicating scent of sandalwood and leather. The second was the sheer heat radiating against her back. She stiffened, the phantom cold of the dungeon chains flashing through her mind. But a large, heavily calloused hand gently stroked her hair. "You are safe, little wolf," a deep, rumbling voice whispered behind her. The sound sent a shiver of pure, instinctual comfort down her spine. "No one will ever harm you again." Beatrice turned slowly, the silk sheets rustling against her skin. Cedric was sitting beside her, his massive frame looking almost out of place amidst the delicate pillows. The dark circles under his golden eyes betrayed his exhaustion. For a man known as the ruthless conqueror of the northern wastes, he looked at her with a reverence usually reserved for the moon goddess herself. "My king," Beatrice rasped, her throat dry and raw. She tried to sit up and bow her head, a reflex ingrained in every disgraced noble. But Cedric's hands gently caught her shoulders, pressing her back down. "Cedric," he corrected her, his gaze intense. "To everyone else, I am the king. To you, I am yours." He lifted a silver goblet from the bedside table, bringing it to her cracked lips. The cool, sweet water felt like a miracle. As she drank, she looked at the man who had torn iron from stone to save her. The mate bond hummed between them, an invisible wire pulled taut, vibrating with every shared breath. "Why did you come for me?" she asked softly, her emerald eyes searching his face. "I am a Montgomery. My family name is a curse in these halls." Cedric's jaw tightened, a flash of anger crossing his features. Not at her, but at the memory of her suffering. "Your father's sins are his own. You are my mate, Beatrice, the other half of my soul. I would burn Ethelgard to the ashes before I let anyone keep you in the dark." Beatrice looked down at her wrists, now wrapped in pristine white bandages infused with healing herbs. The physical pain was fading, but the memories of her captivity were sharp, jagged glass in her mind. And with those memories came a sudden and terrifying realization. She gripped Cedric's forearm, her fingers pressing into his iron-hard muscles. "Lord Reginald," she gasped, her heart rate spiking, triggering a low, protective growl from Cedric's chest. "Cedric, you must listen to me. I was kept in the oubliette, beneath the grating of the warden's office. Reginald thought I was deaf to the world, lost to the wolfsbane." Cedric leaned in, his expression instantly shifting from a tender mate to a wartime commander. "What did you hear, Beatrice?" "He visited the warden 3 nights ago, before you returned," she whispered rapidly, terrified they were running out of time. "It was not just about stopping our mating. The Dowager Queen and Lord Reginald have forged a blood pact with Duke Frederick of the Western Pax. They knew you would never agree to marry Princess Leonora if your fated mate was found. They planned to kill me. And then at the solstice feast, they were going to slip refined silver ash into your ceremonial wine." Cedric froze. Refined silver ash was practically undetectable, and a large enough dose would paralyze an alpha's internal organs, making it look like a sudden, tragic heart failure. "They intend to assassinate you, Cedric," Beatrice said, her voice trembling but resolute. "Reginald promised Duke Frederick that with you dead, the council would seize control as regents, paving the way for a Western Pack takeover. A servant named Bartholomew was paid to spike the casks." A deadly silence fell over the room. Cedric's eyes bled from their human brown to a terrifying, luminescent gold. The betrayal of his mother locking away his mate was a crime of twisted pride. This was high treason, a plot to slaughter him and hand his kingdom to his enemies. "They underestimated my Luna," Cedric finally said, his voice a low, lethal purr. He leaned down, pressing his forehead against hers. "You have not even taken your throne, and you have already saved my life." He stood up, his massive silhouette cutting an imposing figure against the firelight. He strode to the door and yanked it open. The captain of the guard stood at attention. "Captain," Cedric commanded, his voice echoing down the stone corridor. "Arrest the sommelier, Bartholomew. Tear his quarters apart until you find the silver ash, and prepare the men. We have a traitor's court to convene." The night of the full moon arrived with a heavy, pregnant tension hanging over Worm Keep. The courtyard was packed with thousands of wolves from the inner territories, gathered to witness the highly anticipated mating ceremony of their king. Word had spread like wildfire. The king had found his fated mate, and the political landscape of Ethelgard had fractured. Torches blazed along the battlements, casting a fiery glow over the snow-covered grounds. At the apex of the grand stone staircase leading to the keep, Cedric stood in his ceremonial armor, blackened steel adorned with the silver crest of the dire wolf. The heavy doors opened. The crowd fell into a hushed, awe-struck silence. Beatrice Montgomery stepped out. She was no longer the broken, starving girl chained in the dark. Dr. Aris's tonics and Cedric's unwavering care had worked miracles. She wore a gown of deep emerald velvet, matching the fierce, unyielding green of her eyes. Her dark hair cascaded over her shoulders in thick waves, intertwined with silver chains and diamonds. She walked with the poise of a woman who had looked death in the face and survived. She was breathtaking. Cedric stepped forward, offering his hand. As her fingers slipped into his, a collective gasp rippled through the gathered packs as the sheer, undeniable power of their combined auras washed over the courtyard. But before the high priest could step forward to begin the binding rites, Cedric raised a hand. The courtyard went dead silent. "Before I bind my soul to my queen," Cedric's voice boomed, amplified by his alpha power, "the rot must be cut from this kingdom." He gestured to the side. Two heavily armored guards dragged Lord Reginald forward in chains. The former advisor was battered and terrified, weeping as he was forced to his knees in the snow. Beside him, dragged by her own elite guard, was Dowager Queen Matilda. She looked pale, stripped of her royal finery, wearing a plain woolen dress. "Lord Reginald," Cedric announced to the massive crowd, "you have confessed to treason, to the attempted assassination of your king, and to the torture of your Luna. The punishment is death." Without hesitation, Cedric drew his broadsword. The execution was swift, brutal, and public. A single swing severed Reginald's head, sending a clear, bloody message to anyone who dared plot against the throne. The crowd erupted in roars of approval, their inner wolves demanding blood for the ultimate betrayal. Cedric then turned his glowing eyes upon his mother. The courtyard quieted once more. "You brought me into this world, mother," Cedric said coldly, his voice carrying over the wind. "But you tried to murder the woman the goddess made for me, and you conspired to sell my kingdom to the West. I will not spill my own blood tonight. But you are no longer a queen. You are banished to the silent sisters of the Eastern Wastes. If you ever cross the borders of Ethelgard again, I will hunt you down myself." Matilda trembled, tears finally breaking through her stoic facade as she was dragged away into exile, her legacy completely destroyed by her own ambition. Cedric sheathed his sword and turned back to Beatrice. The blood on the snow was a stark contrast to the brilliant white moonlight beaming down upon them. He reached out, cupping her cheek, his thumb tracing her jawline. "My kingdom is yours, Beatrice," he whispered, loud enough for the priest to hear. "My fangs are your shield, my heart is your throne." "And I accept you, Cedric," Beatrice replied, her voice steady and clear, projecting absolute confidence to the thousands of wolves watching below. In the dark and in the light, now and forever. Under the watchful eye of the full moon, Cedric leaned down and sank his fangs into the juncture of her neck and shoulder. Beatrice gasped, arching into him as the mating mark flared with burning, magical heat. She returned the bite, sealing the ancient bond. As they pulled away, the pack link ignited with an explosive, euphoric light. Every wolf in the courtyard threw their heads back, releasing a deafening, unified howl that shook the very foundations of the castle. The Alpha King had found his Luna. And the girl who had been locked away in the darkest depths of the earth now stood at the absolute pinnacle of the world, ruling over all of it. Wow, what a journey! From the dark, freezing dungeons to the absolute pinnacle of power. Beatrice proved that a true Luna's spirit can never be broken. King Cedric definitely showed everyone why you never mess with an Alpha's fated mate. Did you love this story of revenge, betrayal, and fated romance? Hit that like button, share this video with your fellow werewolf romance fans, and don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling, dramatic tales every single week. See you next time.